I went to a somewhat rural high school, the kind where everybody knew everybody, at least by face and name. My graduating class had under 200 kids. Walking the hallways, even if you weren't friends with someone, you'd still nod or say hey. It was the kind of school where the loudest gossip never made it past a couple of classrooms and news of serious drama was rare. This happened when I was a sophomore, so around 16 years old. It was a Wednesday, early fall. The air smelled like the first hints of winter coming in over the fields behind the school. I remember that detail because I was standing by the lockers, my backpack half zipped, when I noticed a kid staring off toward the woods behind the football field. His name was Mason. Quiet kid, kind of withdrawn. Not in a weird way, but he just didn't talk unless somebody talked to him first. Most of us had noticed him, but nobody really hung out with him much. That morning had been normal. Fourth period was world history, and Mr. Duncan had just started going over a new lecture about the Great Depression. The room was quiet, except for a few kids whispering back and forth. I was sitting near the back by the window, half listening, doodling in my notebook. Then the loudspeaker came on. Attention, all staff and students. This is a lockdown, not a drill. Lock your doors, turn off the lights, and move to the designated safe areas immediately. At first, people laughed, thinking it was one of those early year false alarms, but then you could see the fear set in on Mr. Duncan's face. He didn't chuckle or roll his eyes like he usually did when the PA went off for drills. He just said, "Everybody under the desks, now." We scrambled, shoving chairs and backpacks to block the door. I slid under my desk and crouched, heart racing, trying not to make a sound. Around me, whispers started. What's happening? Did someone actually get in? The school was small, only 2 floors, with the gym at one end and the library at the other. Security was decent, but we weren't in a completely isolated area. The woods were close, the road wasn't far, and there had been rumors over the years about someone trying to break in during the summer. Nothing ever happened. The first few minutes were eerily quiet, apart from the faint sound of sirens somewhere in the distance. Then I heard something from the hallway outside our classroom. Footsteps. Somebody was walking down the hall, and it sounded like they were testing the doors, checking the handles. Then came a knock. 3 slow taps. "It's okay, this is just a drill," a male voice said. Everybody froze. Mr. Duncan motioned for us to stay down. I could hear kids breathing harder. The person outside jiggled the door handle, trying to force it. Then the voice got louder. "Open up. Come on, it's fine. Just a drill." I remember thinking, he knows this isn't a drill. He's just trying to trick us. Minutes passed. The knocking stopped, but the footsteps didn't. They moved down the hallway and stopped in front of the next classroom. I could hear muffled shouting from somewhere else in the building, maybe from another teacher trying to calm their students. Then came a scream. Not a loud, panicked scream, but a sharp, terrified one. My stomach dropped. That wasn't fake. We stayed under the desks for what felt like hours. In reality, it was probably close to 40 minutes. Sirens were getting louder and closer. Then the loudspeaker came back on. This time it was the principal. His voice was steady, but you could hear the urgency behind it. "Officers are on site. Remain in lockdown. Do not leave your classroom. Do not respond to anyone at the door except law enforcement." I tried to stay calm, but my mind kept racing. Who was in the school? And why? Mason, the quiet kid I mentioned earlier, was sitting at the desk near mine. I could see his hand shaking under the table. I wanted to say something to calm him down, but I didn't dare move. And we heard it. Metal scraping against the floor. I peered under the desk slightly, just enough to see the handle of the classroom door moving. Somebody was trying again. The voice from before came back. "Open the door, please. I'm not going to hurt anyone." That was the last straw. I whispered to Mason, "Do you know who it is?" He shook his head, wide-eyed, muttering, "No, I didn't. I didn't do it." I don't know what he meant at first, but then I remembered seeing him outside the school that morning, near the woods, looking at something, or someone, with a strange intensity. A pit formed in my stomach. Could he? I didn't want to believe it. Mason was quiet, yes, maybe weird in a harmless way, but he didn't seem violent. Still, the way he looked now, tense, eyes darting toward the door, made me uneasy. Finally, the sirens were deafening and police were shouting through megaphones. After what seemed like an eternity, the door handle stopped moving. The principal's voice came back over the PA. "Lockdown is over. Police have secured the building. No students are injured. Please stay in your classrooms until staff can escort you safely." When the doors were unlocked, we filed out in small groups, teachers checking IDs, police moving methodically through the halls, and that's when I saw Mason being led away by 2 officers. He wasn't resisting, but his face was pale and blank. No emotion. Later, I found out what happened. Mason had brought a backpack to school that day with several knives inside. He planned to confront a few of the older kids who had been picking on him since freshman year. The rumor was that he was going to make a scene, scare them, and maybe even harm them. But he panicked when he saw the police arriving and locked himself in a storage closet before they found him. Nobody was hurt, but the lockdown was necessary. I couldn't stop thinking about that moment under the desk with him beside me, fear on his face. Part of me hated myself for not noticing the signs and for not saying anything earlier when he seemed more withdrawn than usual. Another part of me was terrified I could have been hurt or worse. Weeks later, when Mason was in juvenile detention, the school held a meeting with students about mental health and bullying. They didn't go into details about the knives or the potential for violence. It was all very carefully phrased. But I remember looking around at my classmates, realizing how little we actually knew about the people around us. How somebody so quiet and invisible could plan something like that and nobody would notice until it was almost too late. I've thought about Mason a lot since then. I don't know where he is now. I hope he got help and that he's not planning anything dangerous anymore. But the memory of that day, the sound of footsteps outside the classroom, slow knocks, and the scream down the hall, the sirens blaring, still makes my chest tighten whenever I think about it. That lockdown taught me something I'll never forget. You never really know the weight someone carries or the thoughts they hide behind their quiet eyes. And sometimes, even in a small town and a school where everybody seems familiar, danger can sneak in silently, almost invisible, until it's too close to ignore. Even now, if I drive past my old high school, I can remember the windows of that classroom, and the feeling of crouching under a desk, and the sense of absolute helplessness, knowing that somebody had been in the building with intentions we can only guess at. And I think about Mason and the small, almost imperceptible moments that led up to that lockdown, and I wonder how close we came to losing everything we thought was safe and normal. I always thought substitutes were just background noise, the teachers you didn't know, the ones you barely remembered the next week. That's why it was so unsettling when Mr. Cross came to our school during my senior year. It was a gray Thursday morning, the kind of day where the sky seems heavy and the hallways smell like wet coats and cafeteria fries. Our regular teacher, Mr. Levin, had called in sick and the principal shuffled the substitute into our class at the last minute. His name was Mr. Cross. He looked older than most subs, in his mid-40s with thinning hair and wire-rimmed glasses that reflected the fluorescent lights overhead. He didn't smile, not once. He introduced himself quietly and started taking attendance. At first, I didn't notice anything unusual, but then, weirdly, I felt his eyes on me. He lingered on my name when he called it. Not a quick glance, he held it, studying me as if he could see through me. Class went on and I tried to ignore it, but his attention didn't drift. He asked questions only I could answer, and when I gave them, he nodded slowly, like he was jabbing away every word I said. By the end of the period, I felt watched. Not in the typical teacher way, something darker. The next day, he was assigned to our English class. That's when it got worse. He wasn't just watching me anymore, he was waiting for me. I came in late because my locker jammed, and when I stepped inside, he was already there, leaning against the wall near my desk. I froze. He didn't say anything, just tilted his head, and for a second, the room seemed impossibly silent. "Glad you could join us," he said softly. His voice didn't carry authority, it was almost a whisper, but somehow it cut through the chatter of the class. I mumbled a response and sat down, my stomach feeling tight. My friends noticed I was pale and kept nudging me, whispering to ask if I was okay, but I couldn't explain it. I didn't fully understand it myself. It escalated over the next week. Mr. Cross would linger outside classrooms, just standing in the hallway when I passed, pretending to look at a poster or check a clipboard, but he was always there, timing it perfectly so he could see me. I started avoiding the cafeteria, the library, and even the hallways during passing periods, but nothing helped. He always found me. Then the notes started. Folded scraps of paper left on my desk or tucked into my notebook when I wasn't looking. They weren't threatening at first, not explicitly, but they were unnerving. "I notice you, and I remember what you say. You can't hide from me. I'm always around. I brought them to the principal, but he brushed it off, saying substitute teachers are just trying to connect with students, so don't make a big deal out of it. By the middle of the week, I realized he wasn't connecting. He was literally obsessed. Thursday morning, the situation hit a breaking point. Mr. Cross was assigned to cover chemistry lab. I usually enjoyed labs, but that day I was on edge. As I measured out a solution, I kept catching glimpses of him, standing just inside the doorway watching me. Not supervising or assisting, just watching me. His lips were pressed together in that same tight line, eyes tracking my movements. I tried to shake it off and focus, but the sensation of being studied and followed was impossible to ignore. Every time I moved, he moved slightly, always keeping me in view. Then during a lab experiment, a small chemical spill happened near the edge of the workstation. I jumped back instinctively, and Mr. Cross reacted too. Too quickly. He grabbed the container I hadn't even touched, holding it as if he'd been waiting for that exact moment. "Careful," he said, softly. "We wouldn't want anyone to get hurt, would we?" Something in that sentence sent a shiver down my spine. He wasn't warning me, he was demonstrating control. By lunchtime, whispers had started circulating. Some students noticed the way he'd followed me from room to room. A few claimed he was taking notes on a small pad, scribbling furiously. I stayed silent, terrified it would make things worse. It wasn't until third period that the lockdown began. I was doing my work when the intercom came on and told the school that we were in a lockdown. The room erupted in panic. Papers flew and students hid. My teacher grabbed a heavy table and shoved it against the door while turning off the lights. The windows were curtained. We huddled in a corner, trying not to make a sound. The next thing I know, I heard Mr. Cross at the door knocking and yelling to open up for him. The teacher shushed us, signaling for complete silence. We didn't move, even though the knocks continued. The handle rattled as he tested the door. He wasn't trying to force it open yet, but he was letting us know he could. We stayed like that for what felt like hours. Eventually, faint sounds echoed from the hallway. Police, I think. Officers moving quickly, shouting for students to stay put. Then the handle rattled one last time before footsteps receded down the hall. The lockdown lasted nearly an hour. When the doors finally opened, SWAT teams and uniformed officers steamed in. Mr. Cross was nowhere to be found in the school. Outside, police cars lined the street, and students were escorted in groups to safety. Later, we found out he'd been arrested at a nearby motel. He had a vehicle full of surveillance equipment, binders filled with meticulous notes about students and staff, and a backpack containing tools the police refused to describe publicly. They said he had been planning to manipulate the lockdown to trap students in certain classrooms, possibly just to observe them, or possibly for worse intentions. Nobody knew for sure. Even months later, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Mr. Cross is in prison now, but sometimes I think about how carefully he orchestrated everything, how he studied every student, every routine, every movement, and how he could have easily escalated the situation into something far more tragic. I never trusted substitutes again. Even a simple absence from a teacher makes me anxious now, and every new face carries the memory of that quiet, obsessive stare, the soft, patient voice, and the terrifying realization that someone who's supposed to be watching out for you could instead be watching you. I'm very happy I'm not in school anymore. I graduated a few years ago, but more and more every day I hear about incidents at school. On the news, on the internet, and in texts my friends send me. All sorts of horror stories. But the stories online are the ones I'm always finding myself glancing through. I've seen stories online of people relating to how their school went into lockdown, and the story ends up being about some hobo who had been living under the school, or some crazy person from down the street who finally snapped one day. I don't know if they are true, but all I know is our school went into lockdown once. And I don't know if even the people at my school know the whole story as to what happened. I don't even know if I understand it myself. It still seems like a sort of fever dream, something that didn't happen and couldn't happen. It was the middle of third period, math. I had just finished a big test. Found out later I had made a bunch of mistakes and ended up getting a D, but that's not really important to the story. I used the hall pass to go use the bathroom. Unfortunately, the school bathrooms were all located at the stairwells, and, of course, the bathrooms on the first floor where I was were closed for repairs. I had to go up to the second floor, but before I got there, the bell rang. The bell never rang during class before, but as it did, an announcement came over the PA. Students and faculty, we are entering lockdown and this is not a drill. Please, all students and faculty, follow all school procedures. I froze. I could hear sirens approaching. I came out of the stairwell, but already the doors in the hallway were closing and I could hear them locking. I was alone and out in the open. I could go into the bathroom now, but the doors have had no locks on them since my freshman year, after some juniors trapped a freshman in the bathroom and duct taped him inside his stall. They removed the ability to lock them at all. If there was somebody wandering the school, I'd have no chance if I went in there. I ran down the hall. I could see classrooms turning out their lights and covering the windows. I couldn't turn to them for help. All the instructions said to not answer the door. I had to find someplace safe nearby before something happened. I turned a corner and I saw my chance. The janitor's closet was open. Lunch was up next period, so he was probably out setting up tables when the announcement was made. He wasn't in there, and it could easily be locked from the inside, so I jumped in and shut off the light. The only light I saw was from the bottom of the door. I waited, and the sirens grew closer and eventually stopped. Time passed, and I wasn't sure if I was happy that I couldn't hear anything going on, or tense because I had no idea what was happening. Then I heard footsteps. Lots of them. They stopped in the hallway. It must have been police, I thought. I could hear radios and other assorted noises. I didn't think it could be some sort of lone gunman or nutcase, so I listened. One guy in particular sounded like the one in charge. Okay, are we in position? Another guy answered. I didn't know what his rank was, but clearly he was not in charge of the first guy. Yes, sir. We know the suspect is here in the building. C team is across the campus, as ordered, and B team is covering the back entrances. He will not exit the building on our watch. The chief responded. Good. Remember, he could look like anyone, but he must not escape. It's my fault he's here, and it's my duty to deal with him. I couldn't hear much for a while. There was too much movement and too many people all talking to each other to make out anybody from where I sat. I just waited for a little while. Maybe it would all just be over soon, and I could leave the closet and go back to class. Then, that's when it all happened. The chief yelled out, Hold it! Put your hands in the air. Commotion outside stopped abruptly. A moment later, clothes rustled loudly as what sounded like a large number of guns were drawn. Lay down on the ground. Leave your hands where we can see them. He stayed quiet, except for a few of the guns cocking. I said down on the ground. Don't you dare. Try what I think you're going to do. You're not at the institute anymore. I thought I would hear shots go off back and forth, and eventually somebody saying, Suspect down. What I didn't expect was the scream. It wasn't a normal scream. It was somebody crying out in terror. It was like a wounded animal, mixed with the sound of a bandsaw hitting concrete. I've never heard anything like it before, and I hope I never hear it again. Then the guns began to fire. The horrible scream happened again, and then other screams, and then the sound of tearing. I saw the shadows under the door as people moved and fell over, and heard the telltale splatter of gore as it soaked the floor. There was another gunshot, and I nearly yelled out myself when a bullet punched through the part of the doorway. It wasn't very big, but I put my eye up against it, and I could see a group of people being attacked by somebody. But something wasn't right about him. He looked too long in places, like he'd been stretched in a taffy machine. He was moving so fast, though, that I couldn't make anything out, except for him grabbing people and throwing them around like they were nothing. There was blood everywhere. More gunshots. Screams happening again. And again. I pulled away from the bullet hole and sat back in the closet. Then the scream began to fade. I heard a thud and then more footsteps. The chief spoke again, but he was breathing heavily like he'd been badly wounded. Team A, he's down. I repeat, he's down. We need to clean up immediately. I didn't move. I wanted to look again, but as curious as I was, I didn't really want to see. But I heard a lot of commotion for a long time, and then nothing. I don't know how long it was after that, but then the PA announced the lockdown had ended. I came out of the closet, tried not to look, but for all the sounds I had heard, there was not as much sign of a fight as I thought there would be. Even the blood I had seen in that brief time through the bullet hole had all been removed. I went back to my class and just told everyone I had hidden in a stall in the bathroom. People were impressed with my guts for doing it, but if nobody else had heard that scream, I certainly didn't want to bring it up. As you might expect, we all went home early that day. Police and EMT were everywhere, but as far as I could see, nobody was being taken away by either. My parents came and were so happy that I was alright. They had been following everything on the news and came as soon as they could. At home that night, I ate dinner and waited to see what happened on the news. The The live coverage had ended a long time ago, but when the news came back on at 10 o'clock, I wanted to see everything. As it started, I saw classes had been canceled for the rest of the week, but then things started to get weird. The news talked about a student who they refused to name, how he had come to school armed but had been taken into custody after a short firefight. Stranger still, in the footage of the hallway where the scuffle had taken place, the door of the closet, which had been my refuge, was totally unscathed. Not so much as a scratch on it, let alone bullet holes. It appeared to have been replaced outright well before any investigation could have been completed. I saw pictures of the student being led away in cuffs. He didn't have a mark on him. He wasn't even wounded as he was pushed into a police car and driven away. All I saw was him fighting and yelling. Even in my glimpses through that bullet hole, I knew that wasn't the same one I saw. The clothes were completely different. The one I had seen had been wearing a black t-shirt and jeans. The one getting into the police car was wearing a white t-shirt and shorts. The news said nobody had been hurt despite the gunfire, but I knew people had been wounded, even killed. I'd heard them screaming in agony as something vicious had attacked them. Then there was what the chief guide said, talking about something being his fault, the institution, that he could look like anyone. I don't know what happened that day for certain. I didn't see enough and I didn't hear enough to get the full story, but this is what I can tell you. I know there was no shooter at our school. I know that somebody was arrested that day. Someone who I didn't know, who I never heard about ever again. That's right, a shooter who never made another day's worth of news. Just disappeared. When was the last time that ever happened? I know that chief guy and his squads were not cops. I don't know who they were, but I know cops don't clean up a crime scene like that. And no human being has ever screamed like that. Ever. But whatever it was that I heard attacking those people, all I know is it came into that hallway where I was. I was alone, and if it hadn't been for that janitor's closet, I wouldn't have been safe. Could have looked like anyone. Something tells me that squad wouldn't have helped me either. What was it? How long had it been in our school? Had I ever been alone with it and never known what it was? Who were those people who had come for it? Where had it come from? My name's Ryan Green, and I teach 7th grade English at a middle school in a mid-sized town in Ohio. It's one of those schools that tries to feel new but already has that worn-in, tired look. I've worked there for 4 years now, and until last spring, nothing truly bad had ever happened. This all took place on a Thursday afternoon in May. The end of the school year was close. The kids were restless, and everybody had checked out mentally. It was 4th period, right before lunch. My students were working on some short stories, and for once, the room was quiet. That's when the lockdown alarm went off. Now, we've done drills before. Every teacher and student in that building knew the sound. But there's a difference between the drill voice over the intercom and that raw, fast, repeating buzz that means it's the real thing. The air in the room instantly changed. I remember saying, "Alright guys, that's lockdown, you know what to do." Trying to sound calm even though my voice cracked halfway through. I locked the door, turned off the lights, and motioned for everybody to get into the corner, farthest from the windows. We'd practiced it a dozen times. But practice never prepares you for the real thing. And real panic. Sneakers scuffing the floor, chairs scraping as I try to move quietly but quickly. I crouched near the door, just close enough to see the narrow strip of light from the hallway through the bottom of the door frame. I could still hear the faint echo of the alarm coming from the other end of the school. After maybe 30 seconds, it stopped, and the building went dead quiet. Then the silence started to feel wrong. Usually during lockdown drills, the principal or somebody on the intercom would remind everybody it's just practice. But this time, nothing. Just the occasional nervous breath or sniffle from one of my students. I could feel my own pulse in my throat. I checked the clock on my desk. It had only been 5 minutes, but it felt like an hour. I took out my phone and texted a few of the other teachers in my group chat. Any info? Nobody responded. About 2 minutes later, there were footsteps in the hallway. They stopped right outside my door. Every kid froze. Even the air felt still. I could see the faint shadow of someone's legs under the crack of the door. Then there was a soft knock. I didn't move. The knocking came again, this time louder. Then a man's voice said, "It's Officer Daniels. We're checking rooms." That's when I started shaking my head to myself, no. We'd been told not to open the door for anyone, even if they claimed to be police. Only admin or actual officers accompanied by admin would unlock rooms after an all clear. But his tone was steady, firm, like how a real cop sounds. I hesitated. My students were staring at me like I was supposed to know what to do. I mouthed, "Stay quiet," and kept my hand on the lock. He knocked again, a little harder. "Mr. Green? It's safe now, you can open up." Hearing my name made my stomach drop. I hadn't said a word since the lockdown started. The classroom phone hadn't rung. The only way someone could know my name was if they actually knew me or if they'd been reading the labels outside each classroom door. I didn't answer. After a few seconds, the voice got closer to the door, like he was leaning in. "Ryan, do you hear me? It's all clear." The way he said my first name, way too casual. And then it went back to silence. We stayed like that for probably 15 minutes. My legs started cramping from staying crouched by the wall. One of the girls started crying quietly, and another student hugged her, whispering that it'd be okay. I wanted to say the same, but I didn't believe it. Eventually, I heard a new sound, like a clink sound. Then another. It took me a second to realize somebody was trying to use a key on the door. That's when every hair on my neck stood up. Whoever it was fumbling, trying multiple keys like they weren't sure which one fit. I slowly grabbed a heavy metal stool from beside my desk and stood ready with it raised, just in case the door opened. The sound stopped. A few seconds later, there were fast footsteps going down the hall. And then, screaming. It came from somewhere near the main office, followed by what sounded like something heavy crashing, maybe a chair or a table. Then another scream, this one definitely from a student. One of my kids whispered, "Oh no," and I motioned for them to stay quiet. We could hear running, more doors slamming, and faint yelling. Then the sound of someone over the PA system. Their voice shaky. "Remain in lockdown. This is not a drill. I repeat, this is not a drill." That voice belonged to our assistant principal, Miss Diaz. Hearing her tone, that shaky edge made it all feel more real. After that, time blurred. Could have been 10 minutes or 40. Nobody dared to speak. I kept checking my phone but still had no service. Probably overloaded from everyone else doing the same. Then finally, around what must have been 12:45, I heard loud footsteps again. This time more organized, multiple people walking together, the distinct sound of radios crackling. A loud knock. "This is the police. If anyone's inside, do not open. We are unlocking doors one at a time." Through the window panel, I could see the reflection of a tactical vest and a gloved hand holding a key ring. The lock clicked, and the door opened just a few inches. A sheriff's deputy poked his head in and whispered, "You're all safe. Follow us to the gym." My students filed out, shaking and some crying. I stayed near the back of the line, counting heads over and over. The hallways were filled with more officers, their guns drawn and pointed downward. When we got to the gym, I finally saw the other teachers and students gathered, everybody pale and exhausted. I spotted Miss Diaz near the bleachers on the phone. It took about 20 more minutes before anyone told us what happened. Apparently a man had entered through a side door. Around 11:30 a.m., one that maintenance had left propped open for a delivery. He wasn't armed, at least not with a gun, but he was carrying a metal crowbar and a large backpack. A janitor spotted him in the hallway outside the main office and asked who he was. The man said he was looking for his daughter. The janitor knew right away that wasn't right. Nobody was supposed to have visitors without signing in, and went to alert the office. That's when the man started yelling and slamming the crowbar against the locker. The school resource officer tried to approach him, but the man ran down the hallway toward the math wing, where most of the classrooms led directly to the lobby area. That's when the lockdown alarm was triggered. He never made it to any classrooms, thankfully, but he did manage to break into the front office by smashing the glass panel with a crowbar. That's where the screaming came from. Miss Diaz and two secretaries locked themselves in the nurse's room while the man tore through papers and threw things around the front desk. By the time the police arrived, he'd already fled through a back exit. They caught him about 20 minutes later, in the woods behind the baseball fields. He was apparently a former student's father, someone who had been banned from the property a year earlier after threatening a teacher during a parent meeting. The scariest part, he'd been spotted earlier that morning walking around the parking lot, but nobody thought much of it because there was a walking trail nearby. That night I couldn't sleep. I just kept replaying the sound of that voice outside my door, saying my name. The next day I went back to school for a staff debrief. One of the officers pulled me aside and said something that made my blood run cold. They reviewed the security footage, and at one point, the man had stopped at my classroom door. He spent almost 2 full minutes there. In the footage, you can see him bending down to read the name plaque next to the door. Mr. R. Green, room 204. Then seconds later, he started knocking. The officer told me they think he was trying to find his daughter's old teacher, but her last name was Greenfield. The similarity in names was probably what brought him to my door. If I had opened it, if I believed that voice, I don't even like to imagine what could have happened. Classes resumed the following Monday, but things felt off. The blinds on my door stayed down for weeks after that. Every time a footstep echoed in the hallway, I froze for half a second. Even now, months later, when the PA system crackles to life, my heart still jumps a little. I've learned when you hear about lockdowns in the news, it always feels distant, like something that happens to other people. But when you're the one huddled in a dark classroom trying to keep 20 terrified kids quiet while someone knocks on your door, that's when you realize just how thin the line is between ordinary life and the moment everything breaks. I was a junior at the time and gym class was at the end of the day, third period on Mondays and Wednesdays. The gym itself was old, echoing with the slap of sneakers on the hardwood floor, the squeak of basketballs, and the smell of sweat mixed with old disinfectant. We had a sub that day because our regular gym teacher, Coach Raymond's, had a meeting. I remember thinking it was strange because our subs usually came in with a clipboard, a whistle, and a list of activities. This sub, though, didn't introduce herself at first. She just walked in quietly, a clipboard in hand, but her demeanor was like, off. And there was him. Nobody remembered him signing up. He was new, at least he claimed to be. He said his name was Evan and that he had just moved to the district. He was tall and pale, with dark greasy hair that hung in his eyes. His gym uniform didn't exactly fit. Shorts were too short and the shirt was a size too big. But the weirdest thing about him was how calm he was. Everybody else was joking around, shooting basketballs or talking about the upcoming homecoming game. But Evan just watched. He never laughed, never spoke to anyone, and when you made eye contact with him, he seemed to be staring through you. We started the class with a warm-up jog around the gym. Most of us laughed, the usual slow kids trying to keep up, but Evan stayed at the back, keeping perfect pace, without even seeming to breathe hard. By the time we got to basketball, he had already silently claimed a hoop for himself, spinning the ball on his finger and shooting with precision that was almost unnatural. Halfway through, Coach's sub, her name was Miss Langley, as we eventually learned, blew her whistle. "Line up for a quick drill," she said. Everybody did, except for Evan, who lingered behind. When she told him to join, he didn't respond, not verbally. He just walked over slowly, almost gliding, and lined up at the end of the row. Nobody said anything, but there was an odd tension in the air. About 10 minutes into a passing drill, something happened that made the entire gym go quiet. Evan caught a ball that was thrown a little too high, and for a second, he just stood there. Not looking around, not passing it back, just holding the ball like it weighed nothing, staring at the floor. Then he slowly looked up, and his eyes locked onto mine. I swore I could feel it. That moment lasted maybe 3 seconds, but it was enough to make my stomach twist. Then the whistle blew. Miss Langley called everybody over. "Okay, we're going to do some team scrimmage," she said, trying to sound normal, but her voice had an edge, like she was nervously forcing it. Evan didn't move at first. He just turned and walked toward the far end of the gym, completely ignoring the teams. I glanced at my friends and they all had the same uneasy look on their faces. The scrimmage started and we tried to ignore him, but then I noticed something strange. Evan wasn't just standing off to the side. He was watching everybody intently, almost like he was memorizing every movement. He didn't blink much. His gaze flicked from player to player, then back to the ball, then back to us. I tried to shake it off, but the more I watched, the more it felt like he wasn't human. Not in the sense of being a person, just wrong. Then the gym lights flickered. Just for a second, but it was enough to make my heart jump. When they stabilized, Evan was closer. Nobody had seen him move. He was just suddenly near the sideline, standing behind the benches, silently observing. A few kids laughed nervously, but even they didn't approach him. That's when it started. A soft tapping noise, almost like fingernails on the wooden floor, echoing from the far side of the gym. Everybody paused mid-play, looking around. It wasn't a bounce from the basketballs, and it wasn't from shoes on the floor. It was 100% coming from Evan. He was tapping the ball lightly on the ground, slowly, rhythmically, but the sound didn't match the motion. It was sharper and hollow, like somebody was testing a weapon. Miss Langley walked toward him. "Evan, you're going to need to join a team." she said, trying to keep her tone calm. He didn't respond. He didn't even look at her. He just kept tapping the ball and staring straight ahead. Then the announcement came over the PA. Lock down. Lock all doors. This is not a drill. A collective gasp swept through the gym. The sub froze, staring toward the doors. Evan stopped tapping the ball and turned to face the exits like he was expecting someone. His head tilted slowly, almost unnaturally, like a predator listening for the slightest movement. We all scrambled to the corners, teachers yelling for us to get down and cover ourselves or do anything to stay safe. I dove behind one of the padded mats by the wall with my chest tight, my ears ringing from adrenaline. Then it happened. The first sound that really broke the panic. Not the panicked running of other students or teachers, but one set of footsteps, moving across the gym floor with terrifying precision. I peeked slightly from behind the mat. Evan was moving too, but not like anyone else. He wasn't running, and he wasn't walking. He was sliding or gliding along the floor without sound, keeping pace with the footsteps that weren't his. The sub tried to use her phone to call the office, but the signal was gone. Just as she started typing, the gym door handle rattled. Something was trying to get in. Evan froze, and for a moment, it looked like he was listening. His eyes went wide, his pale face almost ghostly in the dim light of the gym. Then he spoke. Not loud, just a whisper that somehow cut through the silence. They are already inside. Everybody turned toward him, horrified. Miss Langley asked, "Who's inside? What do you mean?" He didn't answer. He just looked at each of us, slowly scanning the room and then crouched low, almost animal-like, keeping himself between the door and the rest of us. My friends next to me were crying quietly. I couldn't move, and I couldn't breathe. Then the footsteps stopped, and it was silent. So thick it pressed down on your ears. And then tapping again, coming from the opposite side of the gym this time. Not from Evan, from the corner where nobody should have been. Everybody froze. I realized with a sinking feeling that this person, whatever it was moving freely inside the building. The school doors were locked, but they had found another entrance, and now they were inside. The tapping moved closer. Slowly. One step. Pause. One step. Pause. And then a soft, low whisper. "Don't move. Don't even breathe." Miss Langley grabbed her whistle, blew it sharply, then immediately put her hand over her mouth like she had realized it was a terrible idea. Evan stood taller than before and moved toward the sound. He just stared. Then the sound vanished. Nothing. No footsteps, no tapping, just silence. Finally, after what felt like hours, the principal's voice came back over the PA. "All students are safe. Lockdown is lifted." We didn't move. Not immediately. We were escorted out in a fashion that made sure each student was accounted for. Every cop and officer there had that tense professional look, scanning every corner. But when we looked back toward the gym, Evan was gone. Nobody could explain how he had disappeared. Nobody knew if he had left with the intruder, if he had been part of it, or if he was something else entirely. Later that night, rumors started. Some students swore they saw Evan outside the school near the tree line, hours after the lockdown ended. Others claimed the police searched the building and found no record of anyone named Evan ever enrolling in the school. No paperwork, no emergency contacts, nothing. I never saw him again, and I never want to.